Hello and welcome to How to Avoid a Happy Life, the podcast. This podcast is a companion to How to Avoid a Happy Life, a memoir by Lawrinson, published by Fremantle Press. But you don't need to have read her story to enjoy the podcast. This episode was recorded on Wajak Noongar Budja. We acknowledge the continuing custodianship of this land and the great storytelling traditions of the Noongar people. This episode is called Rootlessness. I'm Danae Gibson, and before we start this podcast, I'm going to talk a little bit to Julia about why this topic. Is it just to make me say rootlessness?
I apologise for that. It is very hard to say. It looks fine written down, but as soon as you try and speak it, it's a bit messy. This is another of the things that was in the memoir, kind of as background. I think you get a sense when you're reading it that I'm moving around a lot. But it was something that I just thought was completely normal until I was well into adulthood, and I realised how unusual it was to move around so much. I know that people who have like army parents moved around a lot, but we just moved around because leases ran out, or mum moved in with another boyfriend, or whatever. And the impact of it on me didn't really occur to me until much, much later. And so I thought it was something, and I'm not the only one, there are other people who have similarly rootless lives, and I thought I'd just reflect on what an impact that can have on you, both good and bad.
When you were thinking about this, reflecting on it, were you able to find places you'd forgotten you lived in?
Yes, yeah, because I went down and wrote the list of all the houses that I lived in. I couldn't remember the numbers of them, although I would have them written down somewhere, but I just had to go month by month, year by year to remember them. And in fact, it's one of the reasons why I have a reasonably good memory of my childhood. Aside from keeping diaries, I can remember how old I was because of where I was living. I can generally remember where I was living. So I can go, I was living in that house, therefore I must have been 11 and a half or something. So it's probably made me remember things more than I otherwise might have.
Rootlessness. When I was a child, I loved moving house. This was just as well because my mother and I moved around a lot. We were never fancy enough to move anywhere interesting. I never changed countries or cities, and I only changed schools 4 times between years 1 and 10. But I was always either settling into a rental or preparing to move out of it. Even before my parents separated when I was 9, we had lived in 5 houses in 4 different suburbs all over the metropolitan area. After my parents separated when I was in year 5, the moving was confined mostly to the same suburb, but now featured the addition or subtraction of new temporary stepfathers. Between 1979 and when I went into an adolescent psychiatric hospital in 1985, I lived in 7 houses, had 4 temporary sort of stepfathers, and had 3 different sets of step-siblings. Between when I got out of hospital in 1986 and when I got pregnant a decade later, not counting stints travelling, I lived in 21 different places in 14 different suburbs. I loved the sense of possibility it brought, organising a new room, exploring new streets, leaving uncomfortable or difficult things behind at my last mailing address. The first duplex we moved into after my parents' separation was built from dun-coloured brick, and the previous occupants had grown jasmine over the asbestos fence in an attempt to render the whole front area less ugly than it was. It was across the road from swamplands that would soon be turned into a housing estate, and the narrow backyard held strange kidney-shaped ponds made out of concrete, which I hoped to turn into a water playground in summer, but the water disappeared into the concrete cracks as soon as it was hosed in. Its other unusual feature was a service hatch in my room, which led into the living room. It had the promise of a motel service hatch, all the ones that I had seen while my cousins were in town from Muckamboodin, but my hopes of being served breakfast through it on a tray were never realised, mostly because we didn't have a tray, and being past toast and Vegemite didn't quite have the same allure. The hatch opened onto a living room which was bare of furniture, but for a table and 2 chairs. The radio that was propped on the kitchen bench served as our sole source of entertainment, aside from the American sailors who visited and showed me pictures of Africa or Japan, or the inebriated friends Mum brought back from the Sunday session. When one lease ended, I often went to a new house or apartment viewings with my mother to find the next vacant place that would become our new home. I became aware of the looks Mum would get, being a single parent with a child looking for a rental. When I was 10, she was refused a 2-bedroom flat on Albany Highway because she had a child. I was outraged. I wasn't a baby. What did they think I was going to do? Mostly I was at the same school, just arriving from a different route. This meant that I became daily friends with whoever was up the road, and more distant friends with the people I might have preferred, but were now too far to walk to. We drifted in and out of each other's houses. Some people had older sisters who thrilled and intimidated me, or older brothers who were either sullen or scary. Houses with younger brothers or sisters held an air of chaos or the cloying smell of soaking nappies or wet beds. There were places we learnt to avoid because of yelling parents or because of the annoyance of house-proud mothers. Our favourite houses were the ones where the parents were out and we could dance, roller skate down driveways, make cubbies, steal tampons and experiment with inserting them into each other, or pile things into 44-gallon drums and set fire to them. When I moved, I would leave those daily friends behind for the next cohort of friends by proximity. I developed an instinct not to pay attention to my physical surroundings. Each house was impermanent, so I became adept at ignoring the wallpaper or the paint on the walls, the state of the flooring, except for one place in Kelmscott which contained carpet boasting fleas that would jump up and bite you if you stood still on it for too long, or any other feature. We could not change anything about the houses, even if we'd wanted to. Before the advent of blue tack, I could not put anything up on my walls, and after blue tack, I had to be careful that its oils would not seep into the paint or rip wallpaper. My mother always complained about the filth that each house we rented was left in, how she cleaned the place we were leaving, only to then have to clean the place we were moving into. She weeded garden beds if there were any, and kept yards with thready dry couch grass alive if it existed, and ignored the dust-making sand if it didn't. But I didn't have to labour in or around the houses, so I ignored all of it. For many years we didn't have television, so I disappeared into the replaying of our limited record collection, once we purchased a stereo system, or lay on my bed rereading the books that comforted me. It has only ever been other people who've brought me to consciousness of my surroundings. Some weeks after I was admitted to the adolescent psychiatric hospital, I invited some of my fellow residents to the house I lived in with my mum one weekday, which was currently free of any of her live-in boyfriends. We took a bus and a train and then walked for half an hour on the footpaths glittering with broken glass. By the time we arrived, the other girls were complaining about the distance and how bogan the suburb was. I can't remember why we were visiting, perhaps because we could smoke in peace or just exist unobserved by hospital staff, but I noticed their faces as they took in the old couch, the black and white television, the tobacco smell in the net curtains, the sandy backyard, my mongrel dog who had a skin condition which made him stink. I put on music, songs I'd taped from the radio, and puzzled over the way they were looking around, seeing something that I didn't. I tried to see the place the way they did, but until I went to their houses later, tastefully decorated places in genteel suburbs, I did not know what it was they were finding fault with. After I got out of hospital, I insisted on moving suburbs. I wanted to start a new life, as if hospital had magically cured me of the emotional instability and self-destructive behaviours that had sent me there. I had learnt to be ashamed of the suburb I grew up in because I had now seen it through the eyes of judging others. The house we moved into, although close to the city, was in far worse shape than anything in the bogan suburbs we'd left. It had an outdoor toilet full of nesting spiders. It had flimsy locks, so Mum affixed her own padlocks because she was so nervous at the drug-affected guys who wandered down from the state housing flats nearby. And there were rats that leapt from the drains if you turned on the tap without giving fair warning and ate everything you left in the cupboards or on the table, taunting the dog with their swift, bold appearances. I ignored the state of the house and took to walking the dog down by the Swan River, dreaming of what I would be able to do now that I was away from the location of my past experiences. The rats gave Mum the motivation to buy her own house for the first time. This was cause for celebration at first, until Mum decided that in order to save for the deposit, we would be moving in with her sullen, round-gutted boyfriend who lived back in the bogan suburbs. I refused to go with her, and so at 16 I moved into a flat in Victoria Park with at first one and then two former residents of the Adolescent Psychiatric Hospital. The round-gutted boyfriend complained and swore as he helped get Mum's fridge up the stairs to the first floor flat. I remember the heat of hatred in my chest as he carried on. If he wasn't such an arsehole, he wouldn't be put to such inconvenience. Any feelings I had of being abandoned by my mother were left in the heat of my resentment of her boyfriend for the moment. From that first flat until surprise motherhood a decade later stopped me in my tracks, I kept moving. I was looking for somewhere to feel at home, trying different suburbs and housemates, leaving Perth altogether from time to time, but being drawn back by a sense of homesickness that had no location associated with it. One of my university friends relentlessly took the piss out of me because the sole decoration in each of my rented rooms, besides piles of books and guitars with stickered cases, were delicate Japanese prints, which I blue-tacked to walls. "What?" I would say to her as she exploded into wheezing laughter. She would shake her head, my offence against taste too far gone to merit being packaged into words. 2 decades later, I bought the first place I have ever truly wanted to live. It is near the city and near my friends. My husband will end up going into a secure care facility 10 minutes away. Our daughter goes first to TAFE and then to uni nearby. Although it only has 2 bedrooms and I can't really afford it, I am prepared to live on baked beans if it means living somewhere I have chosen. My new partner moves in. We have 1 dog and then 2, who we take morning and night to the dog parks nearby. My uni friend, the one who used to take the piss out of me, visits. She gives me helpful advice now she understands the cause of my inability to understand the organisation of things in a living space. The thing that surprises her most is that I now have a house full of plants. There are runners and succulents and dark leaf plants that thrive on low light. I have propagated new plants in glasses of water that I keep on the kitchen sill. Some have grown from clippings I've snipped from the wealthier suburb across the railway line. Some are there because another green-fingered friend has urged me to grow them, but all create a pleasant chaos of greenery. I love to sit outside in the mornings, looking at the shapes of the leaves, the health of the plants, the stages of their growth and decline. Jules, the uni friend, says after one of her visits, nodding at the array of growing things inside and outside the unit, "How'd you learn to do that?"